Hi, this is Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis. It's October 5th, 2019, about 2 in the afternoon, and oddly enough, it's still 100 degrees. Even the weather guy here, it's like, hey, we have no idea what's going on. I was hoping to give you like a fall kind of update, but maybe I'll be able to get that to you in November. Who knows? We'll see. But in the meantime, I was tagged by another YouTuber, an orchid YouTube grower. Her name is Orchid Dee, and she has said it's sort of like a pass the torch kind of a thing where you tag other orchid growers. I guess it started a few years ago, and this is where each orchid grower has like a list of questions, which I've got right here on my phone, and it's sort of like a question and answer or Q&A about the person on the YouTube video. That's me. So this is about 10 questions, or it is 10 questions, and I'm going to go through this, and at the end I'll tag one of my YouTube orchid growing friends and challenge him to sort of do the same. So let's start. Question 1 is, which part of the world are you growing orchids? So I've actually mentioned this in a bunch of my videos, but I'm here in Austin, Texas, which is in the central part of the state, sort of right smack dab in the middle. It is a very unique area, ecologically speaking. We're sort of halfway between the swamp country of Cajun country and sort of like Houston and farther east into Louisiana, and then the Wild West of, that people think of. When people think of Texas, they usually imagine the whole state as just the Wild West, and everything kind of looks like El Paso, where it's just super dry and gets a few inches, and that's very, very not true. Here in the central part of the state, it can be humid, it can be dry one day. It is hot most of the year. Of course, we're in the southern part of the United States, so our outdoor orchid growing season is pretty long. As you can imagine, by this 100-degree, it hasn't gotten cool since May, I guess. And anyway, orchids are doing great. They seem to love it. So that's where I grow my orchids. Question number 2. How long have you been growing orchids? Can you remember your first orchid, and is it still alive? I guess it's really 3 questions all wrapped into one. But I have been growing orchids since I was, I guess, about 12-ish, which would have been 1992. I'll be 40 at the end of this year. So I've been growing orchids for most of my life. And my first orchid is not alive, first of all, so I'm going in backwards order. And I don't remember what it was. It was one of those complex, big, floofy pink cattleyas that were common in the early 1990s. I actually started growing orchids as a kid in Western Canada. I was living in Kelowna, British Columbia at that time, and in middle school, I think. I was about to jump into the next question, but I won't do that until I get there. And yeah, so I was growing on the patio during the summer, and then in the wintertime, or sort of the fall and spring in Canada, it's still pretty chilly. My single orchid was inside, and it sort of grew from there. And I lived in Tucson after there, and I grew some orchids. And then I lived in Hawaii for almost 10 years. I was on the Big Island. I was on Hilo, and then I was in Kona, and then I was in Honolulu over on Oahu, the island of Oahu. And now I've been in Austin since 2010, so 9 years. So that's where I grow. Third question, what first got you into the orchid hobby? I don't know. I really don't know. It was a long time ago. I was kind of a kid, and I think what it was is that I was really into reptiles at the time, and I was trying to start terrariums, and I got into bromeliads for a minute, and I somehow bromeliads, I get, obviously a lot of them grow in trees, and if you're going to grow them in a terrarium, you're probably going to grow the epiphytic ones, and I was. And somehow I learned about orchids growing in trees, and that piqued my interest, and it's been downhill ever since. So That's pretty much what first got me into orchids, and I've just stayed with them for decades. Do you know how many orchids you have? No, I have no idea. I really don't. I probably should. If I was to guess, I would say 100 to 200, somewhere in there. I've got a bunch of compots. I've got seedlings and adults and everything in between. I honestly have no idea, and I can't even guess. What kind of growing space do you have? So my growing space is kind of in transition at the moment. I was actually working on my greenhouse earlier today, and well, let me talk about what I have right now outside. So I grow hot loving orchids, and that's mostly catasetums and their allies, and cattleyas and their allies. I've got some ancelias and some sort of podiums, and they love the heat. They do great, so I really enjoy growing them as well. But I think I may have jumped ahead to another question. But the growing space that I have outside is just under these oak trees that you see behind me, and they're all on these sort of tables out exposed to the world. And in previous years, I would bring all my orchids inside and grow them under lights from about mid-November to early April, and then everything goes back outside. This year, now that I have a greenhouse up, I will transfer my orchids into the greenhouse starting in about a month to a month and a half, I guess. And those will be my 2 orchid growing spaces, and that's it. I do have sort of this glass cube inside. It's this long, it's probably 5 feet long by 4 feet wide by 4 feet high, and it was just a homemade glass box that an orchid grower here in town gifted me, and I've used it I'm still using it for my imports. I'll start my imports off inside, and then work them into the horrifying heat that is Texas during summer. I don't want to bring my imports in. I don't want to just throw them outside during the hottest part of the year, especially if the roots aren't particularly well established, and et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I have kind of this year-round permanent indoor situation. I'm looking to downsize that, though. It's kind of ugly, and with most of my orchids not coming inside anymore and not needing that box, I think I'm going to downsize that to something more visually appealing. How many type of orchid genera do you grow? Lots. I don't know. Again, I guess I'm not keeping track of my orchids as well as I maybe should, or some other people do. I grow mostly catasetum types. I anticipate I'll probably get rid of most of my hybrids over the next couple of years and just focus on the species. And that'll bring me down, at least on the catasetums, to just catasetums and cycnices. For my cattleyas, I have I have 2 Laelia purpurata, and the rest are all cattleyas. Most of those are species. I mentioned sort of podiums and anceliya before. I have a bunch of those. And there's a few dendrobiums mixed in there. Not much else, though. I've sort of divested myself of most of the other ones so that I can really focus on a few dozen, I guess, species and start my own a line breeding program. And I really like primary hybrids, and I'd like to focus on improving the species and improving some of these primary hybrids. I feel like a lot of the primary hybrids, especially the newer ones, somebody makes the cross, they sell out, and that's it. That's the last time you ever see of those primary hybrids. For example, Fred Clark, 2 of my favorite favorite Cycnices hybrids are William Clark and Martha Clark. And those are primary hybrids involving, both of those involve Heron husainum. One involves Cooperi and the other one is Bartiorum. And, Fred was in Texas a couple months ago, actually. And I was hanging out with him and I asked him, I was like, hey, are you ever going to remake these primary hybrids? They're some of my favorite hybrids. And he's like, no, just point blank, no. So I have an interest in redoing some of those primary hybrids for the Cycnices, creating some new ones for Catasetums, and in redoing some of these early Cattleya hybrids and maybe making some new ones. But I'm kind of digressing here. My apologies. Back to the questions. What would be your top orchid gripe or pet peeve? I have to say it's false information. And maybe false information that is sort of perpetuated without really any critical thinking, or people that do the same things because it's always been done. For example, bloom booster fertilization is a complete and utter waste of time and money. Don't do it. It's stupid. It doesn't work. There's no use. Just use a balanced fertilizer all year round and you're done, period. If you want to get fancy, add some kelp and that will help with your roots, and I do recommend that. Another piece of sort of false information is watering your orchids before you fertilize. There's no reason for that. Don't do it. Your orchid roots will swell up and they will not allow any ions or any fertilizer or anything else to go in the roots. Once they're full, that's it, period, done. The whole water your plants before you fertilize was when once upon a time fertilizers were way too strong, and if you just poured those fertilizers on, you would burn the roots. So this was sort of a workaround that. Of course, nowadays we realize that just don't use strong fertilizer and you can just fertilize at will and you don't need any fancy schmancy stuff. I guess the other false bit of information that seems to be common, of course, is put ice on your orchids and they'll grow, which is stupid. Taking jungle plants and adding ice just doesn't seem like a smart idea. And I guess I understand why. Why it's pushed by some of these growers and some of these plants that sell in your local grocery store or hardware store or whatever. It's fast and easy. The plant dies, you go back and you buy another one. Hey, the person selling the plant is happy because you bought two plants, right? And of course, there's all kinds of weird information online. Just know who you're talking to online. Look for good growers who've been growing that particular plant for a long time, and sort of be wary of people who've been growing for a year or two or really not that long and giving really good advice like, you have to do this, otherwise your orchids are all going to die. When you receive that kind of information, make sure it's from an established grower who's been doing that for a long time. So next question. What is the worst orchid advice you've ever been given? I don't remember. I feel like I've made every mistake in the book. So, I really don't remember. I'm going to have to pass on that question. I've been growing for long enough that luckily, hopefully, most of my mistakes, my really horrifying mistakes, are in the past. And that those mistakes were a result of my own incompetence or lack of knowledge at some distant past future or distant past. I really can't remember getting bad advice anytime recently. Luckily, like I said, I've been growing for long enough that I can see a piece of advice or something online and I can push it aside and just move on. Sorry, I don't know. Out of the orchids you own, what are your favorite 5? I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily have 5 favorite plants. I do have 5. So Cattleya nobilior is probably one of my favorite species. Cattleya amethystiglossa is probably one of my favorite species. And Cattleya walkeriana is one of my favorite species. Cycnoches, the Cycnoches species are just amazing. I absolutely love them. I've got Cooperi, Varsavixii, and I think, and Bartiorum at this time. I love all of those. Of the hybrids that I have, I've got a Catasetum Black Knight, which is really, really cool. It's this black flat flower, and in the middle, it's got this callus, which is this cream white, and so it's sort of a reverse semi-alba, which is really cool. That's one of my favorite plants, I think, that I have of the hybrids. Does that count as 5? I don't know. It's my channel. It does. Next question. What advice would you give someone just getting into the hobby? That is a pretty easy question for me. I think go to your local orchid society and meet people. Go see the plants hands-on or firsthand, and A, socialize, B, get advice from people in your area who are growing plants that you're interested in. They should have really good advice, hopefully, of how you should grow your plants, or at least what works, what doesn't work. Anyone here in Central Texas that says, hey, you should grow Masdevallias, most of the longtime growers here are going to say that might not be a great idea. But if you're really interested in growing Masdevallias here in Central Texas, there are ways to do it. There are folks that set up Wardian cases that are cold, or just growing inside. I've got a really good buddy of mine in Houston, which is super hot and humid, and he grows a bunch of these high-level Papua New Guinea dendrobiums, and he grows them flawlessly. They're absolutely stunning, and they're not well adapted to warm temperatures, so he just grows inside all year, and it works great. So there's that kind of information. I guess you can get online, but really digging down and meeting the folks who've been growing in your area for a long time, I think is super important. Both, again, from the social aspect of meeting people and sort of just hanging out with these folks and these folks with a common sort of desire or a common hobby, and then picking their brains, and vice versa, and giving information. This channel, I'm not making any money on this channel. It's just fun. It's fun to discuss the things that I've learned and sort of get that information out there, so that hopefully people don't make the same mistakes that I did, in years past, the sort of the trial and error type of way, I guess. And in addition to joining your local orchid society, join the American Orchid Society. Those folks are really amazing. I'm an associate judge, so I get to see the organization from the outside, like most people, in terms of getting the magazine and watching the webinars, which are amazing. Both the magazine and the webinars are really great source of information. The AOS has really stepped up its game with online information and growing tips, and then seeing some of the behind-the-scenes stuff and getting to know the other judges and the other sort of the folks on the inside are really good people, as far as I can tell. And I've been doing this for a long time in terms of orchid growing and stuff. And yeah, those would be my pieces of my bits of advice for someone not only just getting into the hobby, but just someone who's already in the hobby. If you've been growing for 10 years and you've never joined your local orchid society, I suspect you will really up your game, your orchid growing game, your knowledge base, by going to some of these monthly meetings and meeting the folks who are there, and the speakers. I mean, the speakers that we bring to Texas are just world class, absolutely amazing speakers. And we had a speaker this week who's from South Carolina, and he just spoke about growing orchids and how he does it over there. And for a long-time grower like myself, I'll look at a lecture like that and say, well, am I going to learn something? And it was great because I did. you know, he talked a lot about how he grows using cypress mulch, and it's a tree that I'd never thought of. It's super cheap to buy, and how he does it is really cool. So, okay, and with that, I'm going to tag my friend William Green over at MyGreenPets. William Green has been growing a bunch of cool stuff for a while now, actually, and he has moved from Kentucky. I should probably know that. Sorry, William. To Colorado, and he's been doing some cool stuff with some Caddis and he grew Cattleya rex from flask to blooming, and that was the first Cattleya he'd ever grown. So I would say, in terms of Cattleya growing, he's probably a rising star, and he does some really cool stuff. So on to you. Bye.